Thank you all of you for being here. Welcome to this webinar. I will be your host today. My name is Neila Benamra. I'm the head of programs at B Lab Europe. And I'm very happy to welcome all of you here. So we're here to talk about B Corp standards, how we're evolving, of movements. And as I just presented myself, and as I said, we're going to have a conversations all together for this hour. We usually start conversations with presentations. So we actually have a little poll to start this conversation together with you, to also understand who are you here in the room in that virtual setting, and understanding a bit better where do you come from and what kind of organization or interest brings you here to attend this webinar. So we have a poll that we're launching now for you to answer, so that we just understand if you are here because you're interested in becoming maybe a certified B Corp, if you're here because you have already initiated the process of becoming a B Corp, or maybe here to talk about the movement and more on the influence if you're already a partner, already maybe a B Corp or in the education system, or because we don't put people just in buckets either. If you're maybe just curious or motivated as an individual about the topic, very glad to have you here. Please do just let us know with the poll so that we get to understand better where you're coming from. And as I said, we start with presentation. I presented myself, but maybe some of you might not be as familiar about what is B Lab. So just a reminder that B Lab is actually the non-profit network that transforms the global economy to benefit all people, communities, and the planet. And we have an international networks of organizations that leads what we call system change to support this vision of having an inclusive, equitable, and regenerative economy. We do that with a list of activities that we have, but also specifically, and that's what also why we're here today, defining standards that help to translate in very tangible terms what it means to be a more sustainable company. We also foster a community of certified companies. We have almost 2,000 in the whole European continent, including, of course, the European Union, the UK, and all the countries, including in that continent, that are showing on an everyday basis an alternative of doing business and committing to keep on improving the societal impact as part of this journey. If we maybe check the answers of the poll to just see like who is here, I'm going to see the result in a bit. I can see that most of you are actually already familiar with B Corp as a concept because you're already either a B Corp or becoming or interested to become one. And we do have also some partners and some also curious individuals. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for letting us know. So we're, as just presented, B Lab, and we're operating as well today in the context on the, as I said, the European continents. We see all of us together with you being here, and from what we see in many parts, a growing momentum around sustainability and the economic system at all different levels, which is very encouraging, coming either from citizens, from people and employees, from companies changing also their behavior and taking into account the impact of stakeholders more and more in their different actions, but also structural change happening at a legal level, whether it's from the European Commission with the Green New Deal, the EU taxonomy, the corporate sustainability reporting directives, or also people wanting more legal change, as is the case, for example, in the UK, where they have third quarters of a public also that wants businesses to be legally responsible. So there is an evolution that is happening about requesting and accounting for more responsibility on societal impact of businesses. And on that spirit of continuous improvement, we are here to talk about evolution of our standards, the B Corp standards, that keeps on evolving, following that momentum on making sure that we can stay up to the beat and the leading way of defining what it means indeed to be a more sustainable companies and answer that with energy. So we will have more explanations and elements around this, but without going further, we're going to have this conversation is going to be divided in two main parts, where we're going to have a presentation from members of our standards team, which is an independent entity within our network, but has this huge responsibility and in doing so beautifully of defining standards in a very collaborative manner. And then you will hear more about that and what is this consultation about. But then also conversations about different stakeholders that we have within the movement, to dig further on understanding what it means for the movement to keep evolving those standards. So I'm happy to present Bernard Rau, who is our Senior Manager of Social Standards, who will be talking to you a bit more about, as I said, how the standards are evolving. You can see just to mention that there is a Q&A that is available in the webinar, but you can ask your questions, and the members of our standards team will answer those. We might not be able to answer all of them, but we do commit to follow up afterwards and send any necessary complementary information that will be required. So on that note, I will just leave it to Bernard to guide us through all the work that they're doing and why we're here today.
So welcome everyone to this part of the webinar. We're going to talk about the evolution of B Corp certification standards. Before I start with the main content, the main slides, quick introduction. So I'm joined by my two colleagues, Brigitta and Luana, and my name is Bernard. The three of us sit on the standards management team. We're 3 of 5 members, and we are essentially the ones putting pen to paper, so to speak, on the draft requirements that you have seen or will see shortly. And it's a pleasure to be here with you all. So what is happening, and crucially, why? So a recap. The B Corp standards aim to define best practice and leadership when it comes to business sustainability. The B Corp movement is growing. Nayla already said over 2,000 or around 2,000 B Corps in Europe. So that's the UK and EU. But we also see that the world is changing. We are facing a climate emergency, and the pandemic has reminded us that there are deep-rooted social inequalities. And so we must evolve as well. We must evolve to continue representing leadership and to continue being relevant in this changing world. Now, if you've been a part of the B Corp movement, you'll know that we've made tweaks over the past 15 years. But this is an opportunity to really do more than just tweaks. So how are we going about this? Well, we started a project in December 2020. We call this project the evolution of the standards, and we're looking to launch the standards in 2024. That means we're now roughly in the middle of a 3-year project. Now, this is an exciting time because looking back, well, there's a lot of things that we've already figured out. We've done a lot of stakeholder engagement, and there's a lot that we know about which direction we want to head into. But it's also exciting because there's a lot of time left. So we now have a full set of draft requirements, and there's lots of time left to have discussions, to have meetings like this one, to figure out if we need to make changes and what kinds of changes we need to make before going to launch in 2024. We are guided throughout this entire 3-year process by these 3 pillars. Impact. We want the standards to have as much impact as possible, and crucially, impact on the most pressing social and environmental needs. We want the standards to be clear, because with clear standards, we also have clarity on what it means to be a B Corp. We also have to be responsive to the needs and expectations of our stakeholders. So these are our 3 guiding pillars in the entire process. You can imagine 3 years, what ends up happening is we go through iterative cycles where we do research, we draft, we write, then we go to our stakeholders, we collect feedback, and then we go back to development. And we end up like that with 3 years full of cycles like this, essentially. You might be wondering, well, who are we speaking to? This slide aims to summarize that. We speak to experts, external experts, often topical experts, and the pie graph is a breakdown of what kinds of people or groups we're speaking to. We have just started testing with B Corps. So the green portion of the pie graph we expect to rapidly increase or grow. And we're aiming to speak to 450 B Corps. You might be wondering, well, why 450? That roughly represents 5% of the B Corp community. And crucially, we're going to speak to B Corps representing all regions, sizes, and sectors. We also have advisory groups. So these are formal groups that are part of our network, our governance structure. But importantly, the members on those groups are not B Lab staff. They're external, but they are part of these formal governance structures. To start with, we have the Global Standards Advisory Council, which doesn't just advise, but they also have to accept and approve big changes to the standards, including this project. And then at a lower level, at a regional level, we have the standards advisory groups covering 6 different geographical locations. We have one for the UK. We also have one for the EU. And lastly, we of course have various people and departments within the B Lab and Sistema B network staff. For those who don't know what Sistema B is, they're essentially B Lab's equivalent in Latin America. Let's take a closer look at the new standards. So the new framework will be based on 10 specific topics that are universally applicable and the absolute most relevant for the world that we live in today. These topics will have non-negotiable requirements for achieving certification. What are those 10 topics? Well, those are listed on the right-hand side of your screen. We have 4 cross-cutting topics: impact management, collective action, purpose and stakeholder governance, and risk standards. On the right, we have 4 social topics: fair wages, worker engagement, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and human rights. And then we have 2 environmental topics: climate action, circularity, and environmental stewardship. I often find that in order to understand something new, it's useful to reflect on what do we have now and how is that changing. So that's what this slide aims to do. This is a summary of the current approach. We have companies reaching a verified 80-point score. There is flexibility in how to reach those 80 points. Essentially, there's a pick and choose system where B Corps can figure out or choose where to get their 80 points. And then to recertify, companies essentially maintain their verified 80-point score. So how is this changing? Companies will meet specific requirements on those 10 topics that we just went through. Each requirement will be verified for certification. And lastly, to recertify, not only will companies have to continue meeting requirements under those 10 topics, but there are also additional requirements for recertification, and companies will have to set goals as part of the impact management topic. And this last point, that's really to capture this spirit of continuous improvement, which is important for us, but we know is important for the community as a whole. So we have 10 topics, and I'm not going to go through all of them in detail because that is quite a lot of content. Here are 3 examples to show you how they're roughly structured. So we have 1 topic and then the requirements underneath. I'll take you through fair wages as an example. So again, fair wages is the topic. And then the 3 requirements we have there: paying workers, the workforce, a living wage, reducing wage disparities amongst the workforce, and then companies have to take action on paying living wage in the supply chain. For those familiar with the B Impact Assessment, you might be wondering, well, what happens to all those topics that I'm working on that are not covered directly by the 10 topics? Well, those we for now call other topics. You can see them on the right of your screen. We have a few examples listed, like ethics and corruption or safety. Now, we recognize that they're still very much important. They're part of a holistic approach to sustainability, and we don't want to just completely disconnect the 10 topics from the B Impact Assessment and all those topics. So what we're currently proposing is that these would fall under one of the 10 topics, namely impact management. So companies would still be expected to fill out the BIA and to set goals on some of these other topics. That way, we're avoiding a complete disconnect, and companies still have a holistic approach to impact management. But crucially, work on those areas. So for example, work on ethics and corruption and safety will not be verified, will not necessarily count towards points, and will not form part of determining the certification. The certification will be based on meeting all the requirements across the 10 topics. Quick recap before we go to some FAQs, some frequently asked questions. Evolution is in our DNA. If we look externally, the world is changing, and so must we. There's an opportunity here to ensure that we continue representing leadership and that we remain relevant for this changing world. The process that we're in is guided by the 3 pillars of impact, clarity, and responsiveness. And we're moving away from this 80-point score system because having non-negotiables accelerates business action on the most pressing areas. All of this should mean that it will be more clear than ever before what it means to be a certified certified B Corporation. That takes us to the FAQs. We have after this question and answer session, and I can see there's already some Q&A or questions coming into the Q&A format, which is great. Our hope with these FAQs is actually to preempt some of those questions because, no surprise, there are a lot of questions that keep coming back. So let's go through a few of those. Will a company need to meet each of the requirements in each of the topics? Simple answer, yes, it must meet all the requirements across all those 10 topics. How do the draft standards factor in the size, sector, geography, and other unique contextual considerations of a company? The current draft requirements already are tailored by size and sector, and the size and sector categories that we use are based on what's currently in the B Impact Assessment. We also have certain requirements that provide companies options, and companies can choose what makes sense for their context. With regards to geography, we're now doing testing with B Corps across geographical regions to really understand, well, what are the differences? Is it feasible in all locations? And what we're going to do is we're going to take that information to critically assess whether we need to do further tailoring based on geography. So at the moment, there's no tailoring based on geography in the draft, but it is something that we're keeping a close eye on. My company is currently a certified B Corp or is in the process of certification. I'm sure many of you are wondering about this one. How will my company be affected? Well, a few things to clarify. We're going to aim to minimize disruption, and certainly we wouldn't put out new standards and expect companies to have implemented them the next day. We're going to go for a phased approach. So again, launching in 2024, then there's going to be a phased approach. There's going to be a grace period, if you will, where companies can choose which standards to implement. The reason for this is, of course, it takes time. It takes time to read, understand, and then implement new standards. So for now, we don't know exactly, of course, how this is going to look like. It's something that we're working on in the next phase. But for now, we'll work on the assumption that companies will have at least one full certification term. So that's 3 years to implement the new standards. Some of you might be thinking, well, I find scoring very useful. Will the new standards have scoring? So to be clear, the 80-point score system as we know it will change. We hear from a lot of stakeholders, including B Corps, that they like the scoring models. It helps them benchmark, for example. It helps them measure over time. So with this feedback, we have heard it, and we are looking at ways to integrate other kinds of scoring models into the new standards. So it is something that we want to continue allowing B Corps to do. Do these requirements apply to large multinational corporations? So the answer is yes. And what we're going to do is we're going to add more requirements specifically for this group of companies. They're not in the current drafts because it's something that we still need to work on. For those familiar with the B Lab terminology, this refers to two groups, the large enterprise groups and multinational corporations. So another way of saying this is we will add additional requirements for those two groups, but we have not yet started drafting those, so they're not in the current drafts. How do the new standards address the idea of continuous improvement? So most requirements have this inherent idea of ongoing action or improvement. An example is a net zero target and you make annual progress towards it. We also have extra specific requirements for recertification. An example of this is increasing the percentage of workers or farmers in your supply chain that receive a living wage or a living income. This is something that's very important to us, and we are trying to find ways to make sure that this is captured in the best way possible in the new standards. The last of our FAQs, something that I'm sure this group is also wondering about, will the standards be aligned with the new EU sustainability directives or the EU Green Deal? So the answer is we'll try as much as possible. Of course, it's hard to say a guarantee now that yes, we will, because our standards as well as the directives are currently being drafted. But we're very much keeping a close eye on them, and we do intend to align as much as possible. We have a web page which is publicly accessible, where we have all of these questions answered in more detail, and we also have other questions that are answered. And we also have this available in other languages, Spanish and Portuguese. And I think one of my colleagues, if they haven't already, is going to put the link in the chat. That concludes this part of the webinar. I'm going to hand it back over to Nela.
Thank you so much, Bernard. I hope it's making it clear for everyone what the consultation consultation is about and what the evolution of our standards are going to look like, and also answer the needs that we were thinking of indeed having more leadership clarity and what it means to be a B Corp. So we took the liberty of anticipating some of your questions, as Bernard has already answered a part of the Q&A, but we also see that you are all very active in asking a lot of questions in the Q&A section, which is great. A big thank you to our standards team that is answering one-to-one to all of their questions, but also to our supporting team with Lucia and Bernie, who's also are supporting you in the chat and making this event happening. So we have just a few minutes to actually answer live some of your questions. And maybe, Bernard, going back to you, there was a few questions that I have seen that people have asked around IBMs. And I know we haven't tackled that in the presentation and in focus, but people were wondering if indeed IBMs would maybe become mandatory or will be a requirement in the new evolution, and if maybe it will evolve with additions of new IBMs. So IBM standing as impact business models. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on that, as people seem to be interested in that topic.
I suggest let's make full use of the strength of the team. I'm going to ask Luana to answer that question.
Sure, Bernard. Hello, everyone. Really a great pleasure to be here with you today and see so many questions. So impact business models are a core aspect of our standards right now, and they will continue to be part of the new framework. As now, we are not in the new framework, we are not going to include a requirement that every companies have an IBM. So there are many trade-offs of a direction like this one of requiring IBMs from all B Corps. So we are keeping a more inclusive approach where companies that don't have IBM can certify, though we are always in our process incentivize that they go into that direction if that makes sense for their business model. And we are still recognizing impact business models within one of the topics, which is the impact management topic. So if you go to the drive, you can see in page 75 a summary of the approach with impact business models. But essentially, the first thing that companies will do when they join the BIA is to really answer the questions regarding impact business models. If a company has an impact business model at a scale that is significant, that demonstrate the focus of the company in that impact business models, we understand that this already defines a strategy for their impact management, and therefore the idea is that they only complete that session and set goals to improve on that IBM because we want to incentivize them to improve, especially on that IBM. Then the other sessions of the impact assessment become optional for those companies. Companies that don't achieve that minimum level of IBM, they will still need to be required to complete other operational questions in the BIA. And this is, of course, on top of meeting all the new core requirements. So this is really important to be clear, right? That Bernard were explaining. I know it might be a little bit confusing because it's a shift in our approach, but I hope to have more opportunity to clarify that. And really recommend you go through the drafts, and this is all explained there.
Thank you, Luana. Hopefully that helps to bring a bit more clarity on that topic. And we all realize that also impact business models are also helping to raise the bar in terms of ambition, and glad to see that there is so much interest also from people around here around the topic.
And I must say, apologize.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Can I just add something? We are in our first consultations with B Corp and our community, right? So if you think that, no, we should require IBMs from all companies, please provide that feedback to the survey. This is the type of feedback that we want to listen, right? So just want to reinforce that too.
And that's a very good reminder. As we said, we're here today to answer a consultation and to help to engage on that element. And you have already the link of a survey that has been shared in the chat, and we'll keep on sharing and follow up afterwards. But you all have a role to play as you're being impacted, and you have an opinion that matters and that we listen to. As Bernard presented before, this is a very collaborative process. So we do hope to hear from you, and by answering those questions, getting also you to be energized and motivated to share even more feedback throughout the survey itself. I also see a few questions, and I know this hasn't been totally defined, but I also understand where these questions are coming from. And Bernard had already touched upon the base a little bit about the transition that will happen progressively, but I do see still some questions around what would happen if companies Will they have visibility whether they meet the new standards or not? Will they lose their certification if they do not meet the new standards? Maybe Bernard or someone else from the standards team just to give a bit more explanations on what is the thinking already at the moment, knowing that, of course, this is still being built at the moment in terms of transition.
Bernard, do you want me to answer? I can. Okay, so this is super important to be very clear. Those changes are never designed in a way to cause chaos or disruption in our community or remove companies from our community. We will design all this process very thoughtfully in a way that we have procedures and legacy policies. For example, if you are a company recertifying just after we launch the standards, you will probably have the option to certify under the old standards or the new standards. So you will not be obligated to meet. It will not be mandatory for you to meet all the requirements like this. So you will have time to read, understand the new standards, adapt to meet the new standards, and we will design this roll-up process in a way that take that into consideration. And of course, we will communicate in advance so you can prepare appropriately. So this is a long-term change. This is very important to be clear. Don't know if my colleagues want to complement.
Thank you so much, Luana. And I see there are still many other questions, and we won't have, as I said, a time to address all of them, of course, orally, but we do have also as support of our standards team here helping you to answer, and we'll do some follow-ups. And just to build up on what Luana was saying, the B Corp standards are evolving, but we are all a movement and we're all evolving along with it. So of course, the process is collaborative in the design, but also in the implementation, as Luana has mentioned. So we're all going to evolve together towards those bigger ambition and making sure that we remain leaders in what we mean to shape the interest of all stakeholders and change the economic system. And without further transition and waiting, we have very interesting conversations to share together with you that will be moderated by Maria Correa, that is my colleague and the head of communication and community engagement at B Lab Europe. And that will now take over the stage to discuss a bit more about the impact of this evolution of the standards. Back to you, Maria.
Thank you so much, Nela, and Bernard and Luana, and the whole standards team that is also working behind the scenes to answer these questions, and of course to everybody who's joined our session today to learn more. As you can sense from us, this is a really exciting period for B Lab and as part of our evolution. And I think beyond kind of looking at the specific requirements, we also want to put these changes into perspective and to share some different perspectives of what this means, why we're doing this, and also to share kind of, the different experiences that go into this process. So today for this fireside chat, I'm very excited to bring three very special guests today. So we have Chris Turner, who's the Executive Director of B Lab UK. We're joined by Carlota de Paula Coelho, who's the Senior Sustainability Consultant at Maas Business. She's also a B Corp expert member in the EU Standards Center at EFRAG. And we also have Thomas van Kraan, who's the Managing Director of a longstanding B Corp Triodos Bank, and also a core member of our Standards Advisory Council member for B Lab. So let me stop sharing screen so you can actually see their faces. We're really excited to have this conversation today and talk about some of the relevant questions that have come up as a part of these standards, and also so you can understand the different lenses through which to consider these standards. So to kick this off, I'd love to ask Chris the first question. So Chris, from your perspective, this process to evolve our standards has been ongoing since before 2020. So I'd love to ask you, why do you think it's critical for the movement to continuously evolve our standards in order to meet the urgency of our times, and also to take into account the feedback that we've received from different stakeholders and to maintain credibility of the movement?
Thank you, Maria. Good question. And hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to be speaking about this. It's obviously a really important moment for all of us, for our movement more broadly. And yeah, as you say, Maria, it's absolutely crucial that ultimately the standards and the certification that sits at the heart of that movement reflects what leadership looks like. And we heard a little bit about that at the beginning from Bernard. And I think one thing where I would kind of root my answer to this question is on the sort of the various different roles that B Corp plays, because it is obviously the foundation of everything that we do is the set of standards that we've been talking about today and the certification that is powered by those standards. But of course, we're also an incredibly powerful movement for change, and we're a group of leaders from all walks of life all around the world who are committed to changing the economic system and creating positive impact in a world that we can all thrive in. So I think the answer to your question really is rooted in those different identities and those different roles that we play. We cannot evolve that keystone, that foundational part of what we do with the standards and the certification without bringing the movement into that process. And that is partly because we're all in this together and we all need to work on it together. But it's also because the kind of leadership which is going to pave the way towards that transition and that systems change is increasingly within our community. And so how can we tap into that? How can we ensure that we're designing standards with and for that community of leaders is absolutely crucial. And what I would say, obviously, is that we've always done that. The standards have been on a constant sort of process of being redeveloped ever since they were created. They've been refreshed and revised. But of course, this is a pretty fundamental shift. Moving from the BIA as it stands now to having these topics with minimum standards is a really fundamental shift. And we heard briefly earlier on that again is a reflection of the world around us, the increasingly challenging context that we face, the increasingly pressing and urgent challenges that we're trying to solve. But also, it's partly a quality problem created by the work that we've done, to raise expectations and to get people asking more challenging questions of business. And so now the time is right to set minimum standards, but obviously we need to do so in a way that really brings the movement and the leaders that we get to work with every day into that process.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I think speaking about bringing the movement and some of the key leaders in there, I think my next question is to Thomas, who's a key part of the community in the UK and in Europe. So Thomas, as a leader in a pioneering company that has seen this experience of the movement grow and also experienced what Chris was talking about of that importance of building the education and the expectations of the role of business in this space, what does this step signify to you?
Oh, a beautiful question, and thank you for having me on this panel. I'm very grateful to be able to contribute to this important session. Well, I think something that Bernard started with, namely that we're all evolving, and so should the standard evolve as well. I think this is an important step where we recognize that the former system didn't necessarily reflect well who the leaders were, who the champions were in our communities. On the other hand, and I won't start listing all the social and environmental disasters that we have been facing at the growing frequency recently. Not taking into account certain minimum requirements was increasingly seen as a weakness of the previous or the current model, and so I think it's a testimony to the fact that B Lab and the B Corp certification is really building on the strength of the community that it creates. That it is listening to this, that is sensing what is happening in the world, and has taken on board, the Herculean challenge of reviewing the standard. Thousands of companies, tens of thousands of companies are actually actively using it. So this is massive as a change. but I think B Lab is responding to a need, societal need, environmental need, and a need perceived within the community. And I think it's a amazing step. I just can share that as a standards advisory member, the work being done is extremely thorough. People listen extremely well to advices, and I think the process has been also clarified very, very shortly or at a high level by Bernard. And so this is very exciting moment, and I'm looking forward to the final product to be announced in a couple of quarters' time.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And indeed, I think this consultation is just one of the many touch points to gather that feedback to really shape these standards. And I think to undermine what everybody else has already mentioned, it is incredibly important for all of you to continue to share your feedback. So please do take the survey and share your questions in this session as well. And I think between Thomas and Chris, we've talked about kind of the big picture of why. But we'd love to also get into, okay, but what does this mean for a company that's, actually measuring their impact? And one of the over 200,000 users who use our impact management tools. So for that, I'd love to pass the next question to Carlota, a consultant that's been very involved with the B Corp movement. So Carlota, can you please share, how do you think this affects how a company understands and measures and improves its impact? What are the biggest opportunities, but also challenges, like from an impact management perspective, of this evolution in your perspective?
Okay, thank you, Maria, and thank you for having me here. So first of all, and echoing a bit what has been said already, I find that these new standards and the 9 core topics, they really consolidate our identity as B Corps. They define what our priorities are, and in many ways it's daring because it's departing slightly from already existing classifications of other frameworks. And I see 3 main opportunities for improving impact within businesses, right? First, and most importantly, I find that there is a huge opportunity for justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, which, in my opinion, is seriously lagging behind in the EU. So the EU is still very much stuck with a climate-first approach. So it's really refreshing to see an approach on ESG which is balanced and not all about E. And then secondly, there's also a specific core topic that I love, which is worker engagement. And I think that for most businesses, retention of talent and employee turnover is much more frequent and painful and relevant question and say impact on biodiversity, And I love biodiversity, but it's just more agnostic, right? And then again, echoing what has already been said, I think by Chris, the third opportunity, which has always been there, hasn't changed, is for progressive, forward-thinking businesses to keep thriving in conscious capitalism. In many ways, it gives power to the people, to the consumers to vote with their wallets. And I'm hoping that possibly through ESG funds, which are, I think, estimated in trillions of dollars.
Thank you so much, Carlota. And I think one of the things you mentioned is the holistic nature of having, these 10 core topics. These topics, of course, from fair wages to human rights, are all things that are already covered in the certification process in some way, shape, or form, whether that's through the disclosure questionnaire or the assessment itself. But my next question is to Chris to talk a bit more about that specific evolution of what is this shift from having a flexible scoring methodology to having specific non-negotiables, say about the role of business in transforming the economic system.
Thanks, Maria. I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, I think we've spoken a little bit earlier on about the sort of scale, things we all know and feel, the scale and the urgency of the challenges that we face, and that's sort of the dark side. But then I guess, the more positive sense that there is a growing tide, wave of momentum behind our movement, and the sort of movement of movements working towards changing the economic system. And so for those reasons, I think it's natural for, as has been happening already, it's natural for our standards to get higher and harder, and for leadership to be a more demanding sort of characteristic to kind of demonstrate. Now, I think it's, you said, and Carlotta, you're saying the sort of the standards as they stand, the BIA as it is a, represents a pretty holistic approach to impact management, and that needs to remain. That's key. In the existing standards, there is one thing that all B Corps have to do, which is the mission lock. They have to make that commitment. They have to, their governance, they have to lock in their commitment to the sort of wider set of stakeholders. And so I think it's important to be clear, there's always been that kind of fundamental commitment which all B Corps share, and that obviously remains as well. And what that does is that all locks us into the mission, and it kind of gives us sort of real solid grounding of shared kind of fabric for the community. And I think a nice way of thinking about what we're doing with these additional mandatory requirements is essentially strengthening that fabric. We are weaving together more mandatory requirements, reflecting the things that we know to be characteristics of leadership in business in this shift, into something that is going to be a much more kind of hopefully still a flexible fabric, but a stronger fabric that binds us all together and can bring more and more people into the movement. So these additional mandatory requirements are going to reflect the urgency of the challenges that we face. They're going to bind us together with a sort of stronger shared fabric of tangible commitments. And in that way, I think they provide us as a movement together with a couple of really clear benefits as well, in terms of making it easier for us to clearly measure and communicate our impact as a whole, which I think is really, really key. Obviously, every single B Corp has an incredible role to play and an incredible impact. But actually, the more that we can tell our story as a whole, as an aggregate, then I think the more powerful force we are for this kind of systems change that we're seeking. So by another benefit of, other than, all the sort of stuff about reflecting urgency and the impact we can have as individual businesses, the fact that a collective identity of the B Corp community and the ability to aggregate the story of our impact is going to be really, really powerful in terms of affecting this broader systems change we seek.
Thank you, Chris. I think that goes back to Bernard's 3 guiding pillars of this evolution that he mentioned earlier of how does this help us maximize impact? How does this give us greater clarity and also help with the responsiveness? So I think it truly, this evolution truly hopefully will help us galvanize that impact, but also give this collective sense of what the community is working towards and working to address. So thank you so much. And I think looking at that from beyond B Corps, beyond our specific movement to the business community as a whole, I think my next question is to Carlotta about given what's happening at a regulation standpoint and what's being proposed across the world really, but I think particularly accelerating here in Europe. How does this evolution fit with the direction of what's expected from companies from a regulatory perspective?
Thank you, Maria. Well, let's say that first, if your company is making the effort to even look at the standard, it's already more prepared than most companies for the legislative tsunami that is coming from Brussels. So I've been saying this for a while now. Completing the B impact assessment is a formidable exercise of preparation. You don't even need to go for the certification. At more granular level, right? So I mean the EU standards setter, B Corp voice, and we're not fully done yet with the new European Sustainability Reporting Standards, the ESRS. Of course, I've been advocating for as much alignment with B Corp as possible, but I think we should probably still keep on working on interconnectivity of indicators and data points if we really want interoperability between the frameworks. Regarding the CSDDD, sorry, this is Brussels language, the due diligence directive, as you know, because you lead the Interdependence Coalition, we're still actively lobbying to strengthen the director's duties part to mirror our stakeholder governance best practices. And then, if you look at the social taxonomy, or the green paper for it, let's say, and the current taxonomy, stakeholders are the same, objectives are the same. There's, we're not reinventing the wheel, so it does fit very well. And in all cases, our mission as B Corps was always to go above and beyond compliance, right? So if we want to retain our medals as the most forward-thinking businesses, then we have to increase the thresholds.
Thanks, Carlotta. And I think, and thank you for also highlighting the work of the Interdependence Coalition. And I'd also love to acknowledge the Better Business Act in the UK, which Chris is actively leading to. All of these initiatives are, again, advocating for what Chris already mentioned is at the core of our standards from the beginning, which is really embedding stakeholder governance into how a business operates and ensuring that businesses are taking into account the interests of people and the planet in their decision making. So beyond evolving the standards, we're continuing to advocate in other venues for these changes to be made. And I think we've talked about so many different perspectives here, and there's been so many questions asked as well in the Q&A. But I think, Thomas, my last question would be to you out of all of the things we've discussed, and obviously all of the feedback that's been provided through rounds and rounds of feedback, to you, what do you think is most valuable and important about the direction that these standards are moving in? Obviously, it's still a work in progress, but if the audience here had one takeaway about what's most valuable, what would you like to share? It's a hard question.
Yeah, it's a hard question, but I don't think I will limit myself to one. But a couple of things that come to mind when you ask this question. So the first thing really is the introduction of the performance requirements. We call them minimum standards at Triodos Bank. I think in some other documents we call them non-negotiables. I think this is really important. Really important because we have a couple of very objective targets or deadlines or objectives that what we want to meet collectively, and so not recognizing them in the certification would be, I think, a weakness. So the fact that this is really being introduced, I think it's a good thing. Another element which we haven't really touched upon today, but I think which is also extremely important, is the operational weight of going through a certification. And I know that there is a balance to be found between how thorough you want to be, how representative you want the certification to be, how you want that other companies can rely on the work that B Lab is doing in certifying a company, and that it's trustworthy, this certification, that it's credible. But this requires quite a heavy operational weight, both at the side of B Lab, who has to go through all this checking and monitoring, but also at the level of the company, obviously, that has to go through all this the entire process and evidencing all the statements that they're making. And I know that in a certain way, the team today is also taking into account this element of simplification as much as possible in the design, and I think that's also quite important. A challenge that I see today that is not completely, I think, solved yet within the work today is that compared to when the first draft of the original questionnaire or certification of impact assessment was realized, the field has become extremely crowded. So we have many more process certifications, labels. We also have legislation, such as Carlota explained, and there is an element of relevancy which is important. So why would I even go through the work of getting B Corp certified if there is so many other things that I need to do anyway? And I think we have spoken today a lot about the improvement from that perspective. But there is also another side to it, is how much can I avoid rework, and can we build bridges between the certification and the other initiatives and other labels that exist already in the market. And there as well, I see that for the people who you have seen earlier who are actually developing these standards, that a lot of work is being put to try to integrate within the B Corp certification, I would say, credible labels, credible standards, credible legislation that already exists today, so that we can actually, it's not an island on itself, but it's really connected to other initiatives that exist today. So I think these are our strengths. I would invite everyone to have a look at them, to give their comments, because again, I can testify that this is the feedback is taken seriously. That's at least how I experience it in the advisory committee. And I wouldn't want to stop my contribution without thanking all the people involved in this hard work. You have seen a couple during this presentation, but it's amazing work that they're realizing, and I think they deserve a round of applause. Although the work is not finished yet, but let's say interim applause. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And indeed, I'd love to extend that round of applause to the entire standards management team, and also, of course, to the three of you for joining me for this conversation today. So thank you so much for sharing this perspective. And again, thank you everybody for joining us. I'll hand it over to my colleague Nayla to close us off for today. But thanks again, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Maria, and of course, all the panelists for this conversation. I do hope that this brings a complementary vision from what the standards team have already shared. We've seen a lot of questions that have been asked. Thank you for being already active by being here and by asking your questions, and of course, for the standards team to keep on answering those. We hope that this presentation has providing enough clarity and at least incentives and motivation to provide your feedback in the consultation. You will have a link again being shared after the session of a consultation. Just a reminder that, as Luana emphasized before, this is a draft, so we're still in process. We're not at the end of a process, but still in the middle of defining this. And as this is a very collaborative process, but because it's impacting all of us, you all have a voice that is worth being heard. And that's, thank you, Thomas, also for mentioning it, is really being taken into account into the process thanks to the work of our standards team. So please do take the time to share on the feedback that you find is relevant. You will see that the consultation is very comprehensive because we talk about holistic, about comprehensiveness. We do not expect the feedback to be like comprehensive on all the draft itself. Please do take the time to review, especially the topics that you think are the most relevant for you to share feedback on, because that will be useful for the team. And hopefully with the actions of this collective intelligence, we will have this comprehensiveness coming with all of you together to make sure that we do build those standards in a way that brings, as we said, this expected impact and leadership, the clarity to what it becomes to be a B Corp, and the feasibility around how we can shape that transformation, because it is a long journey and measuring its impact takes time, but it's such a rewarding journey, hopefully, that has been already expressed here, that along the way can help to do that. And before we close the conversation, we just wanted to check on of you. As we said, it's a conversation. You're part of it. We already talked throughout the Q&A, but a last poll just to understand, how do you feel after this conversation we had together about sharing your feedback in that consultation? Do you feel maybe curious about it and want to know more? Are you maybe inspired by what you heard and you're going to immediately like open the draft and share your feedback, which would be amazing? Maybe you're intrigued and you still like needs, as we said, a bit more explanation, or you want some other answers to be answered, and there will be also opportunities for that. Or maybe you're dubious and maybe it doesn't resonate totally with you, and you may not have some constructive critics to share with us, which are very open. It's also part of the feedback. And please do take the time to share that feedback with us. As we said, we will take it into account. So without further ado, and without taking too much time, just a reminder that this consultation is taking place until the 15th of November. So you do have still some time to take into account. I encourage you to also have conversations about it because it can help to bring the advocacy, the awareness around you, and to shape your own convictions about it. It's a continuous process. And as Chris also mentioned before, that's also helped to foster that power of a collective. We all do that as a movement and as a collective, because we can only achieve system change in a coordinated manner to answer all this momentum that is happening. It can only be transformed if we organize ourselves and put our resources in common to make it happen at all different levels. So thank you for being here already today, and for all the actions that you're already doing in an everyday basis and being interested in those topics. A reminder also, the standards are here and free for everyone to use, independently whether you want to become a B Corp or not. I know we talk a lot about B Corps as our flagships, but it's also free for anyone who wants just to measure its impact, because we consider that stakeholder governance and interest are the matters in the business of all of us. So please, whatever interest you have, do contribute to share your feedback. We'll be happy to hear about it. And thank you to the whole team here for making this webinar happen, that hopefully has provided valuable information. So wishing you a great day and a great new adventures in keeping on improving your impact on an everyday basis all together. Thank you.